This week, is the cyber NTSB, kind of air quote cyber NTSB, a good thing? Russian virtual keyboard for the win. Information should be free. Hang on while I unplug the internet. Security must be taken seriously. Poison the water hole to poison the water hole. Bombing hackers, how industry best practices have failed us in the world's worst article on information security ever. Publishing exploits is still a good thing regardless of what the studies say, and more. Then a technical segment from our very own Adrian Sanabria and Sunil Yu from Jupiter One. Then we wrap up with a pre-recorded interview with Wheel on the 21 Nails Exim mail server vulnerabilities. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Cybercriminals are using social engineering, loaded with urgency and fear, to successfully prey on victims, your employees, or your customers. Protect your Office 365 email from today's most sophisticated attacks with Barracuda Email Threat Scanner. It's a free tool to help protect your business from these hard-to-detect attacks. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner uses artificial intelligence to hunt and eliminate Office 365 email threats. Find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Get your free email threat scan at securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
And now for our host with the most, who's also the mostest with the hostess, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 695, recorded on May 20th, 2021, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left, Mr. Matt Alderman is here in studio. Matt, welcome.
Oh my gosh, it's been so long. I'm so excited to be back here. It's been 9 months since we did this for Black Hat. So it's like, yes, we're in studio.
And I like our respective drink-making responsibilities. Like, when it comes time, you were trying to make an old-fashioned earlier in the week, and I was like, you're not modeling. I'll take care of that. And then it came time to make dirty martinis, and all of a sudden, like 6 martinis appear out of nowhere that are just fabulous. So we make a good team.
Yeah, we do.
In a lot of aspects, including making cocktails.
Yes,
which is important for Security Weekly.
And the rest is sitting right over here on the side table for later.
Yes, we've got. It's going to be a very interesting show. Dr. Doug White is in the house. Welcome, Dr. Doug.
No, 6 martinis. Like I knew Matt was back because I walked in the door and people were like shoving martini glasses at me, going, "Here's a martini, drink this because there's too many more in the cooler." So yeah, it's going to be one of those shows, I think. But hey, school's out for the summer, as Alice Cooper said.
Yes.
And, so now just the weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth of all the people who didn't do so well. And
that seems to be your life right now, Doug.
It is. Let me tell you, it's one of those sad realities of just like, fail them all and let God sort them out.
That you failed.
What?
How's that guy doing that you failed? Or was that an old story?
Oh,
no,
which one?
Yeah, we can't. That's a FERPA violation. So we're not bringing that up. It never happened. I was not there. I was.
Dr. Doug, is it too late to turn in some of my assignments?
No, but you can get extra credit.
Extra credit doesn't do you good if you're starting with a 20 out of 100.
Well, I will tell you, that's one of my old extra credit tricks. Of people that are failing to come and ask for extra credit, you give them the most horrifically awful assignment to do, and then tell them, it's worth 5 points. And they're like, okay. They're like, how long will this take me? I don't know, 30, 40 hours probably. And like, but I will get all 5 points. Sure, why not?
I almost added it to the show notes. It was some programming mathematical MCP. What is MCP? Like multi-sourcing. Like if you want multiple people to contribute to a problem or input data, but you want to remain anonymous, there's like a basic algorithm for that. And then there's something called, someone the last name of Beaver had come up with a mathematical solution for that you can implement in code. And I started reading. I'm like, look at the time. I'm not going to be able to cover this, or even be able to run it by Doug or anyone else before. So I flagged it.
Leave it to Beaver.
Leave it to Beaver.
Yeah,
There you go.
That would be a good extra credit assignment.
that would be a good extra credit assignment. Solve this equation.
Yes. Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us.
I am. I decided to don B-side San Francisco shirt to pretend that I was actually out in San Francisco. So not even close to the next best thing to being there, but it's.
Do you have a tiki drink to replicate, the party at the Tungamar?
No, I
okay.
can't. I just have whiskey.
Nothing
Whiskey
wrong with
gets me
that.
by. No.
Mr. Lee Neely is here with us remotely.
Hi, gang.
Welcome,
We're
Lee.
ready to rock and roll from Idaho.
Absolutely. Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome.
Thank you. Very, very jealous. Not in San Francisco and not in studio. And I do not have a Matt Martini. But, happy to be here still.
I like it's a Matt Martini.
I know.
That's a good.
It's Matt Martini.
It's a Matt Martini.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Quick announcement. Do you want to stay in the loop? All things Security Weekly? Of course you do. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. Subscribe to your favorite podcast catcher or via your favorite podcast catcher or our YouTube channel. Sign up for our mailing list. Join our Discord server and follow us on the newest live streaming platform. That's right. We are on Twitch. If you've got a specific topic or guest you'd like us to cover on the shows, we have our blankets ready, and we will cover that guest. Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests. Complete that form, and we will review those on a regular basis. On to the news. Where does everyone want to... I know where I want to start, I think. Does anyone... I'm a little fired up.
Can we get the Hill article over with first, or did you want to save that for later?
You want to start in the dark place? We can start in the dark place.
Well, just do it and move on.
What? Do you not see value?
It's your show, Paul. It's your show.
Well, I was trying to... all right, fine. We'll start with my story number 16. Our cybersecurity industry best practices keep allowing breaches, according to Alan something who's writing for The Hill. Just prefacing that before we get started. He says industry best practices, for instance, dictate that network administrators should be boxed in administratively. They should not be able to see what is happening on workstation servers or storage resources. My response to that is that actually that's not what we dictate at all. He suggests we implement a one strike and you're out hiring policy for information security employees. When they fail, don't let it happen twice.
That'll help the skills gap shortage. Yeah.
It's just wrong on so many levels. Like, how do you measure failure? And so we all have to be perfect because no one makes mistakes. Like, not just in our profession, but any profession. Then somehow we're unique.
I was going to say we should implement the same one strike you're out policy for journalists at the Hill. He's out. Sorry, buddy. No more work for you. Down to Amazon warehouse.
It gets better and worse all at the same time. Also, never hire an information security employee who has ever worked for a firm that has had a security incident. It took every ounce of strength to say that with almost a straight face.
What
I mean,
the hell?
By this point, when you're writing the article,
is there such a thing?
You gotta have really hit the crack pipe hard. And I'll let everyone in a little secret. Like 99%, maybe pretty close to 100% of us have worked at a company that has had. Okay, let's just say 100% have had a security incident. So maybe we should all just quit, join the dark side, and take over the galaxy, I guess, is what really that ends up happening.
Well, because we can't work anymore. We're out. There's a shortage. So there will be no security teams left.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, wait, it gets better. Embrace holistic approaches to information security. My comment was, like, dude, you took a huge bong rip before you wrote that, and you said it out loud when you typed it, and it sounded really good.
Well, even the professor who wrote this said his column included what is likely to have been the worst wording I have ever used in my life.
Yes.
Like, okay,
so
obviously
this person's a professor, and then, but this was in the editorial notes at the end because he must have gotten like a bunch of hate mail about it.
Yeah.
And he tried to backpedal, but even when you read what he's like, oh, my intent was to hold leadership accountable. He now states
by
that
firing
businesses and
everyone.
industry should implement a one strike and you're out hiring policy for information security leadership whose job it is to secure systems and networks after a major extensive breach.
And professors.
Guess what?
So information technology professors, you make a mistake in class, you're out. No more for you.
Dear Alan, you're still wrong on all points.
Yeah.
And we will be looking for your future publications. And I really hope you have better suggestions in the future because this article, quite frankly, sucks.
Well,
I think that succinctly sums it up.
Nothing more to
I'm
say.
wondering if the state of Wyoming followed this. Remember after they just had a big breach and they fired the CISO for the state and for the healthcare system that had the breach.
They must have read this article right before that.
That's what I
That's
figured.
probably what set them on the path to righteousness. Yeah, they realized everything just was going to be resolved by firing someone whenever a breach occurred.
I mean, that's why you have a CISO and a security team is so that when you are breached, you have people to help you with it.
Yeah, and then what do you replace them with? So you fire your CISO, go, okay, buddy, you're out, and then you're like, I need another one, another CISO,
Right.
please. It's just next, get in here.
Wait. Have you worked for a company that's been breached or had a security incident?
Oh, sorry,
I
can't hire you. Yeah, no, but you can become a journalist at the Hill.
Let's
Or
not
a
be bitter.
professor at the
Or a
Cox School of
professor.
Business.
Yeah, there you go, at a business
Smooth.
school. That's
SMU Dallas,
They
yeah.
never screw up. I mean, you can always count on professors to get it right.
Covering that article came at a request of one of our listeners and good friend of mine. I won't name him.
Oh, my God.
On the show. But
I'm looking at the professor's bio on LinkedIn.
Uh-oh.
He used to work for Networld and Interop.
interesting.
In fact, it says he's a NOC team member for the last 35 years. He's still there, according to.
Of course,
I mean,
he
just
has
a-
tenure.
I guess he's never made a mistake.
When he has tenure.
I like to point
Has
out those
Networld and
articles.
Interop ever experienced a breach?
I just like to point out those articles because I don't want people to read that and think that that's actual reality because it's the furthest thing from reality.
Yeah.
And so when this article comes up and if someone asks you about it or whatever gets posted somewhere, that all of our audience is aware that like now you don't have to go read the article because you know, oh, that's the dude from the Hill that just was way off base.
I thought maybe it was a joke when I did read it. I thought it was like, you remember
Is
like
this the Onion?
oh,
Like,
yeah.
You remember Daniel Defoe wrote this this treatise back in the 18th century that was called A Simple Solution or something like that, where he was proposing eating people to reduce population, and all these people thought he was serious, and he got all this backlash for it. I was kind of like, maybe this guy's just trying to be like funny, and it just kind of fell, whop. But then I was like,
I just
maybe
had
not.
Soylent Green for dinner last week.
Hey, it's what's for dinner tonight.
And speaking of Interop, CISA says just disconnect the internet for 3 to 5 days to evict SolarWinds hackers from the network. That's how we solve a
Yeah,
breach.
like hold on while I unplug the internet for 2 or 3 days.
That's how they did it in my day,
Wait,
by
what?
God. Just turn it off and on 2 or 3 times
Can you
real
even
fast.
get away with that anymore?
No. You think a business is going to allow you to disconnect from the internet to serve your customers? Are you freaking nuts?
I mean, like 25
So
years
AP
ago, we might.
So
APT
Tyler,
doesn't
what
have
the hell's
persistence?
going on at CISA?
Persistence, man. Persistence doesn't exist anymore.
Ooh, deep.
I don't know.
I mean, you could just block all outbound traffic to the. Never mind.
I mean,
No more acts.
I know a couple years ago when we went down to Antarctica, I was disconnected for 18 days. The first day, 3 days, I had the DTs, but I just don't see a business in this decade being able to run without internet. I mean,
How?
hell. I remember when we could fail over to a T1 and still live. That was a long time
Right.
ago.
And how much of your infrastructure software actually relies on the internet just to get connectivity in order to run? So
A lot of like the Ubiquity Wi-Fi access points. There's a configuration option. If they lose internet, they just turn off the Wi-Fi radios.
yeah,
Like so many things just rely strictly
On the internet. So think about this. Not only commercially, there's at least 12 agencies that were part of the breach. You're going to shut those agencies off from the internet so they can't communicate with each other?
That's it.
Let's just shut down the government for 3 to 5 days. I bet we'd get a better result.
and we'll need to fire a lot of you. So the internet's down, and we're going to fire all our staff. But hey, problem solved.
What I don't get is why, if you disconnected the internet for a few days, that once it comes back, they're not going to reconnect.
Right. I mean, unless you have a plan to like clean up all the shit that happened. Like, what does disconnecting from the internet for 3 to 5 days
the malware like turn itself off if it can't?
It's like
it self-destruct?
It loads at boot time, and you just turn it all back on. It's like, yeah, we're back in business. Let's
But this
go.
is propaganda by the Russians to go, if we tell them and leak out that if we don't have connectivity on malware for 3 days, that it erases itself, they'll believe us, and they might turn themselves off.
And they'll fire their staff. I'm sorry, I can't get off that. I'm like it's like, our whole staff is gone, and the Russians said it would be good if we flipped our internet off for 3 days and turned it back on.
And then they can't find job. And then wait, the Russians are going, well, since that guy Allen wrote that article for The Hill, it means they'll all get fired. No one will hire them because they've been in the company with a data breach. Then we can recruit them to hack for the GRU.
Mm-hmm. There you go. It's a long game kind of strategy.
It's a long game. Maybe Allen's writing for the Russians.
I could see that right after you get fired from your CISO job. Then like some guy calls you, goes, "Good evening.
This is Serge.
Do I have a job for you?"
But it gets better because you only give the only one of the ransomware pieces goes away, or the malware pieces. There's another one in hiding somewhere that even when you bring it back up.
Well, this is the latest thing that I heard. I don't know if it's new or not, but what happens is you ransomware. Well, I guess first you'd ransomware the 30% of like your infrastructure that's like really critical with one key. Then you very quickly ransomware the entire network 100% with the other key, and you go pay me a ransom. And they go, okay. Then you give them the key that ransomwared everything, and they decrypt everything or most everything, and then they get to the 30%. They're like, wait, why can't we unlock these systems? And you're like, oh, I need another $4.4 million to unransomware those systems because they seemed really important to you. This is what happens.
Tiered subscription model,
right? When you do business with criminals.
Yeah. And they just keep sending you pieces of the people. It's like,
right?
Here's another toe. Now how much would you pay?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
And a free set of Gensu knives if you send us the Bitcoin before midnight.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the other one that's like the other company that I had an article in here, those two, a tweet that basically said, there was this company recovering from ransomware and they're trying to restore backups, but they were having a tough time restoring from backups because none of us have ever had that problem before. Mm-hmm. And they're like, you know what? Maybe we should just let them leak the data. So they went back, and the ransomware people are like, if you don't pay, we're going to release all your data. And they're like, yeah, actually, could you do that? Because we're having a tough time with our restores, and we really want our data. Ed Scotus very astutely pointed out, he said, in that case, the availability is more important than the confidentiality.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Right. It is.
And he even said another stat that I thought was interesting. Even if you get a key and it's only been single encrypted, on average, only 92% of your data is coming back. There's an 8% loss.
Even if you pay.
Yep. And even if you get all your systems decrypted, there's still like an 8% loss in the equation.
Crypto is hard.
Yeah.
Right. Which
is why
everybody's
Jeff does
been fired,
not
me.
Yeah. All our crypto people were fired too. So what a drag.
Seems like you could make a business case for 8% losses very easily, and just hire some more security people that have been through breaches and know how to deal with this.
Ooh.
That too.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean,
but Alan says you can't.
But also, I think
You
that.
just have to hire them in another role. You call them something else. Management consultants.
Yeah.
But I think backups and restores falls on the IT teams.
Yeah.
IT security teams are going to, I mean, we all push for that heavily. Like
They should audit it.
It's a business continuity thing, but it's also a security thing. And we're all on the same team. And we're like, can we all just make sure that we have backups? And one, it's not a backup unless you can restore it.
Yep.
And that's a function of like everyone
Yeah.
that does security or IT or some combination.
It's IT's responsibility to do it.
Right.
It's security's responsibility to ensure that it's being done effectively and report on that on a regular basis. And so, it's everybody's responsibility. We're all in that one together.
It is. I think it was.
So wait, if we all fail, does that mean we all get fired?
Every goddamn one of us.
Every single one of us. Business Security Weekly, we interviewed a guy from Unitrends who actually walked us through a ransomware case and the issues and some of the challenges you have to think about from a restore. Because cyber insurance plays a very important part here in ransomware. If you have a cyber insurance policy, they're going to go get some third party to certify the backup before they allow you to restore your data. Because they don't want to have to pay twice, right? And so there's a lot of steps you have to think about when you're trying to restore.
Technically, they don't want to have to pay once, man.
Well, that's true.
That's very true.
Proceed.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I've thought about that like the ransomware gang just sits out there and they wait till you do the restore. They got a script going, pink, 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 looking for the same hole they got the first time. And then the minute you restore, it goes, oh, sorry, got you again.
Yeah.
You're going to have to pay again.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, there's a trend out there, actually, I saw where, I don't know if I captured it as a story. Some of the ransomware operators are double ransomwaring. So you have
double
two
encryption.
different encryption keys.
Are they using
two different keys?
Are they using XOR? Because that could work out in your favor.
13, buddy. Oh, for real. I mean, they're using two legit.
Yeah, they double encrypt. So they got
double encipher.
That way you can. Well, they also. I've heard that there's stuff where they're doing like in waves, kind of. So they're decrypting in pieces to encourage you to pay. So we show you we can decrypt part of it. We're not giving you anything good, so we're going to decrypt this little piece. Now you better pay, or we're going to wipe it all out, or whatever.
Yeah. I did see the double encrypting, Lee. It's a good point.
Yep.
Different from the scenario I think I described, but double encrypting everything.
Yep.
That is crazy.
Has anybody actually seriously looked at what kind of encryption they typically use? Does it vary?
Yeah, it varies a whole lot. I mean, you'll see stuff where it's very simple encryption, literally like the hard-coded keys. We've looked at a lot of these tools in the lab, and you'll see stuff where the keys are literally static. They're like embedded in the data. So if that's what hits you, then you just have to go get the key out of the disk and put it back in, and you can decrypt it yourself if you know how to do that. But other stuff is using very, very sophisticated encryption that is going to, you're not going to be able to break it. Because I've had clients call me and say, "Can you break this?" And it's like, not within the expected lifespan of the universe at this point. So
you need a little more quantum compute.
Yeah, we need a quantum computer.
7-zip's pretty good.
I want a quantum laptop.
Depends on the algorithm they're using, man.
It does, yeah.
Quantum does or doesn't apply here.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, key management is the first place people look a mistake in key management.
Yeah,
would negate any kind of encryption.
And I mean, so just as an advisory, what they tell you to do is if you do get ransomware, the first thing you do is find an unransomwared machine, hopefully, and go out and see if it's been broken already, because there may well be a break for it somewhere out on the internet.
Right.
If it's old, or if it was really stupid in the first place, or you may get that bad news that says, nope, not going to happen. Go to your backup archive and start restoring. And then that's when they call and go, what if I don't have any backups and I'm ransomware? And like, well, you're screwed.
Start over.
You're going to be fired, and you need to call this guy Alan at the Cox School of Business, and he's gonna advise you that you'll never work in this town again, son.
You can't let that go.
I can't let it go.
He's not going to let it go.
Oh my God, I hate stuff like that.
He's not going to let it go.
Can't wait till some CEO's calling me going, we had a mistake. Should I fire everyone?
Alan says I should fire everyone.
I read this article in CEO Yachting Weekly, and they said fire everyone when a mistake occurs.
Because that's a leadership article for BSW.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly.
I'm going to expect to see that next week. Firing everyone when things go wrong, the only solution. The Scarlet Letter.
I have some more. I have more issues. I got some issues to work out on this segment. I really do.
Paul's Therapy, Part 7.
I need some therapy.
Paul missed most of the shows this week, so he's getting it all out here.
He hasn't had an audience in 5 days, so it's like, here it comes.
I'm just fired up. So,
all right.
And I love the fine folks at Kenna, and they do great work. I don't agree with this one, and we'll have them on the show likely to hash it out. I'm more than willing. And I'm not knocking the folks at Kenna. Obviously, they either are a sponsor or were a sponsor or something like that. And they do great work and they have a great product. I just don't. Maybe there wasn't enough details here, but like from what I read in the article, because admittedly I didn't read the whole report, but I took snippets out of context, which is what we do on this show. So I'm challenging this one because it states, the report found, so publishing exploits early doesn't encourage patching or help defense. The data shows. That's the title. The snippet is, the report found that network defenders were almost exactly as likely to mitigate a problem when an exploit had been released before the patch. If an exploit was released first, there was a median of 46.3% of systems that were patched in the first 3 months. And then all their statistics follow that about 6 months, 12 months, whatever. Patches were actually more common when the first exploit was released after the patch, although only marginally so, and remediation followed on the same curve, 49.1% after 3 months. My whole take on this is there's a huge difference between an exploit being released and exploit being used in the wild, and this did not represent that. Like, just because an exploit was released doesn't mean it's being used in the wild, and you may be patching based on release versus being in the wild.
There's other variables here, and that's why
I have a whole list of them. There's also a huge difference between a proof of concept and the overall effectiveness of an exploit. Was the exploit a denial of service, or was it a remote code execution? What if an exploit does not have a patch? What if it was a configuration mistake? Was that accounted for in the data? What if a patch is really hard to apply and roll out versus other vulnerabilities that are easier to remediate? Also, what if I didn't apply a patch, but I turned off the service, created a firewall rule, or implemented some other kind of compensating control that was easier, perhaps, than applying the patch? I see you're breaking out the scotch. I'm going to need it. What if I do that more often when an exploit is released versus applying a patch?
Paul, you're starting to foam a little bit there.
Yes.
There's another one.
What if exploits are released for software that is not popular, or I just don't have in my environment, therefore I don't apply the patch? Was that where you were going? Or you have something
operating system. Operating system is a big factor here. I think, right? Because Microsoft's made it really easy with Patch Tuesday to schedule patches and do routine patches. So I think operating system and the type of that patch is a huge factor in this. And I'd like to see the data broken down, because my guess is for Windows, you would see a bigger difference, maybe for the other ones. And so how much of that drowns out or averages out some of this data? Because OS is a big factor here too.
Yeah, like,
well, technical people don't have the most technical or even highly technical security teams don't have the capability to dive into some of the exploit code and understand how to mitigate, much less, you're doing micro mitigation because you don't have access to the source code. So you're just doing compensating controls at this point. You're not actually mitigating or patching. You're mitigating the risk at the edge probably, or with a local firewall or some variable rule. You don't have access to source code. So I have to strongly disagree with this.
I'm glad to know I wasn't the only one.
No. Yeah, I mean, there's so many variables here. The data's too high level for me to really understand, what are all the scenarios, what are all the different variables, what went into the study, because I would expect to see major differences between Linux operating systems and Windows operating systems.
Versus browsers versus...
Exactly. Third-party software is completely different set of stuff. We all know nobody patches freaking Adobe, but,
Yeah.
Did anybody actually go get the actual report?
No, I just pulled a bunch of stuff out of context because that's what I roll.
Because that's what he does.
That's how we roll here.
I think Ed's gonna drop. I'm just telling you, Ed Bellis is gonna drop a link in Twitter for us to go download it.
Love you, Ed.
Well, the link's in the article, but you have to
register. That's where I'm.
But I think a better study, because I am interested in the results in terms of studying this problem a little deeper, and I don't think it should look at exploits versus patch. I think it should be exploits versus action. Like, did you take some action? Did you tune your defenses? Did you tune it out altogether? Is one thing,
mitigation could be a big factor in that. I didn't patch it but I mitigated it by this. So if everything has to come in on port 500 UDP or it doesn't work, then blocking port 500 UDP may be an effective mitigation, and you wait till the next patch cycle to worry about it. But on the other hand, you may have to patch it.
There was one of the exploits for Exim that Wheel said required 23 gigabytes of memory. So that's not gonna be too high up on my list, right? The feasibility of that is not quite there.
And it can be complicated to patch firewalls and things like that. I've been doing that myself, and it's it needs to be done, but it's like, this is not just a matter of me going update. It's like, first roll up to this version and then remove this, and then once you've done that, take this out and change all these commands around and then add this other piece. And I mean, I've been working this for like a week, and I've still not got it fully patched up to like the current because it was a few, ticks behind.
But like privilege escalation is different
than
privilege escalation is different from remote code execution too. I may not apply that patch because it is a privilege escalation, but I'm confident that I've got proper authentication with two-factor and I'm gonna.
I agree.
I'm gonna patch stuff that's publicly facing versus stuff that's privilege escalation, and I'm going to factor that in.
Yep.
But we're looking at this from one perspective. I'm curious to anyone's thoughts on, because I experience this on almost a daily basis with my day job customers, the PCI ones, where too many of them are not necessarily patching based on notifications or all the threat sources and whatever that detect that there's a vulnerability. Quite a lot of them are just responding to the results of whatever vulnerability scanner that they happen to be using. So in that context, there's a layer here that it hasn't. Maybe they touch on this in the full report, but there's a layer, at least one layer in here of if something is if a vulnerability is announced either before or after the patch is available, what are the scan vendors doing in terms of if it's published before, do they think of our time at Tenable, gentlemen? Would we have written a plugin for a vulnerability that was announced ahead of the vendor coming up with a patch?
And if it was disclosed, then as soon as the disclosure happens, all the main vulnerability management vendors will have that patch, or that they'll have the check in place.
What constitutes disclosed? Because that generally, I took that to mean is usually the vendors are formally announcing it.
Correct.
And they usually don't do that until there's a patch.
Right? Sometimes. In the case of Patch Tuesday, for Windows, within 24 to 48 hours, all those signature checks are going to be out there, and all their patching reports are going to be updated to reflect that. But to your point, Jeff, that's when Microsoft discloses it, because typically they have a patch to apply for the patch report, right?
So the presumption I'm making with this article is they're talking about, what if somebody discovers the vulnerability, and let's say they're not getting anywhere with the vendor, which is usually the scenario we talk about. So they decide to go ahead and publish it and disclose it publicly on their own, sort of independent of the vendor. How does that factor into does the scanner then pick it up?
Yeah, most of the vendors are going to have teams monitoring all that, and as soon as somebody discloses it, they're going to pull it into the lab.
I wouldn't say it happens in every case, but it depends. Sometimes Microsoft chooses not to fix something, and I don't know if that ends up in the vuln scanners or not.
Right.
To be honest with you,
I bet it does.
I would hope so.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure
if it's like tangible, sometimes these things are
they're
so complicated, it's hard for people to develop a scan for it.
Yeah,
and and if Microsoft hasn't disclosed exactly how it works or something, it's going to be really tough to develop like an actual vulnerability scan that's going to detect it. So it may be out there, it's there, but you don't have any idea how to detect it. I know that's a more rare kind of thing, but
it's interesting. Like, who makes the decision if the juice is worth the squeeze, right? Is it the vendor? Is it the scan provider? Vuln management? Is it you as the enterprise defender? Is it the person who discovered the exploit? Like, I don't know.
No, I agree. But I love the juice is worth the squeeze. One of my favorite idioms is It's the juice is worth the squeeze.
But someone's going to make that decision in your organization, and is that someone running around analyzing all of this stuff all the time? Because we cover this stuff every week. I don't expect that our audience is going to. I'd like to think that some of our guidance to be like, this is one you'd
have to have a very mature organization to have that kind of person hour kind of capacity to have people doing that.
In the old days, you used to have those teams. I think the vuln management vendors have done a really good job staying on top of these disclosures and getting those checks in, so that I don't know that resource exists anymore. And a lot of it's going to depend on how it's disclosed, who it's from, how complicated it is to create a signature for, et cetera, from a timeline perspective. But I think the vuln management vendors do a better job of getting those signatures out quickly.
Yeah, because there was like a WordPress vulnerability. They came out with 4.7.5.7.2. I think is the version they were. Is that what it was? I don't think I added the story. But now that you're talking about it, now I wish I had added it, because I did just that. I read it because we run WordPress and I should look at this, and it was a vulnerability in PHP Mailer, and I'm like, that looks kind of bad, and it was object something vulnerability. Now I'm really wishing I added it, but WordFence had a post on it, And I read the WordFence post on this, and they were like, it's really not likely to be exploited. And so I was like, well, you guys are WordFence, and you know WordPress really well, especially with vulnerabilities and exploits. I'm like, so I'm not going to really worry about it either. I mean, I'm still going to upgrade, but I'm not going to drop everything I'm doing right now to go upgrade.
But a lot of
5.7.2?
What is it?
We're running 5.7.1 right now.
5.7.2. Yes, 5.7.2 fixes PHP.
And just remember, a lot of organizations don't have you. I mean,
it's their loss.
Yeah, it is.
Or logged into WordPress right now.
I mean, I could make a mistake tomorrow and be fired, though.
You'll be available. But once they
I guess you just get to do podcasts the rest of your life.
They're going to stamp Finn on your forehead, and that's it. So it's just like, oh, he's got a Finn packet stamped on his forehead, but no hire. But I mean, some organizations just don't have anybody that can even fathom any of this stuff that we're talking about. Not because they don't want to, it's just because they can't get anybody. Yeah. And they're sitting there going, I don't know, patch, don't patch. I don't know what to do. Should I click the update button, or should I do this? And I mean, that makes it very. And those aren't always just like little tiny companies. They can be pretty, bigger organizations. I mean,
it's easier if you've got one WordPress instance, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll go patch that, sure. But now you're a large enterprise, and you've got 1,000 WordPress instances. Do I roll out something new to all 1,000 of my WordPress instances?
Or even one? I mean, what if it breaks everything, and then you get back into that whole cycle of, well, I need to test this because I don't know what it's going to do to my site, and my site is my business. And if I roll this patch out and it breaks everything because, oh yeah, now you have to do something different, I've got days and days of patching, fixing, trying to get this thing running again.
Restoring.
Along those lines, and there's different aspects of it, but WordPress and PHP engine updates have been much better. Like, I haven't noticed too many issues doing that. However, when it comes to plugins. And themes, plugins and themes, which also need to be updated in your WordPress, obviously, because it's code that's executing on the server, and sometimes in the browser. Those need to be updated. Those will have an impact. I mean, Matt and I we've worked together countless times where Matt's like, did you just update the themes? I'm like, yeah, they were kind of out of date. And then now the menus are blue.
Now the menus are blue instead of black. It's like, what the hell happened?
And then Adrian and Paul have to spend ungodly amounts of time debugging style sheets.
I've been doing the same thing because I pushed a patch this week, and literally within a few hours, I got a phone call from one of the people I support, and he was like, did you do something? All our servers are not accessible now. And then the other person called and said, my servers are down. What's up? And I'm like, oh, hell. And then,
now you're fired.
Yeah, I fired myself and stamped Finn on my forehead, and now I'm just out in the streets, with a sign that says we'll do literally anything for, the opportunity to program. Like,
SMU Dallas, you got an open position?
I'm now working for The Hill, writing journalistic articles.
Somebody cut.
I've heard Wyoming needs a new CISO.
So on WordPress, that leads us into the watering hole attack, which was a WordPress plugin vulnerability that created that watering hole.
I thought it was interesting that a watering hole would literally used to poison the water hole. It's just the irony is not lost on me.
Protect in your holes.
It just goes to show that bad guys sometimes have a sense of humor.
So an investigation undertaken in the aftermath of the Oldsmar water plant hack has revealed that an infrastructure contractor in the U.S. state of Florida hosted malicious code on its website in what's known as a watering hole attack. Malicious code seemingly targeted water utilities, particularly in Florida. So, I mean, this is sort of like a watering hole plus supply chain attack.
Yep.
Because if you're going to do a watering hole attack, like we used to do this with Linksys routers. If there was code that if you had a Linksys router as your home gateway firewall, if you clicked a link, you could exploit the router. And like a great place for that are the forums where people go to when they have questions and want answers about Linksys routers. I would put my code somehow in there and hack one of the forums so that everyone would go load this code.
The classic watering hole.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. In this particular case, it created a way to collect information about the different water plants, which looks like may have given them the intelligence they needed to say, actually hack this water plant.
You're running TeamViewer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, we probably all could have surmised as well. It would have been a really good guess anyway, if I had to make an educated guess. a lot of ICS systems use. We had this conversation on ESW a couple weeks ago. This type of remote software, it's interesting in the context of ICS. Tyler, I want to get your take on this too, right? Because these systems have to be running 24/7 to supply water and natural gas and electricity. That's a constant thing that has to be supplied to consumers. And in order to monitor that constant supply of utilities, someone has to be on a system that provides monitoring. In order to do that, you would go to something like TeamViewer, because now it means I don't have to be physically in front of a computer. I can be somewhere else. Otherwise, someone 24/7 has to be there.
in the plant.
And especially in times of COVID, that may not have been the case. And you might have seen even an uptick in these remote access situations. Tyler, I'm sure you've seen this in your...
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very common. And honestly, especially with something like an ICS environment where you may or may not have a domain, right? So you may not have something readily available like RDP or RDP infrastructure or VPN for that matter.
Which RDP isn't great either, which means,
No, I mean... And honestly, TeamViewer, like for as much crap as we give them, it's been around for 2 decades and is a very functional and highly secure piece of software when utilized correctly. And
we can all agree it's better than VNC in terms of security and usability.
Yes, and both of those things.
Yeah.
So, and everybody's kind of had their day in the light from that standpoint. I mean, LogMe and TeamViewer, it really doesn't matter. Webinar, GoToMeeting, go to support, all of those are essentially the same thing, and all of them suffer from the same kind of attack that this would have came under, and they all are used within ICS very, very heavily. Again, we're talking about maybe accessing this from a network to network where you are using a local LAN connection for TeamViewer, which it is possible. And then that's a box that you're jumping through on RDP or jumping through for VPN. And so, again, this is not outside of the realm of operations for ICS and is very, very common. They have to have someone there. And a lot of these boxes are inside of a small plant in the middle of nowhere because that's where the functionality of the ICS happens.
I mean, it kind of ties into my story number 8 as well. Wind River. Now I'm going to have a mental blank. VxWorks is Wind River,
right?
Which is popular on embedded systems especially in industrial control systems in general, right? They came out and said recently that security must be taken seriously. The only way to do that is to be proactive. There are billions of new devices constantly connecting to locations around the world, and it's important for solutions builders, hardware and software, to be thoughtful stewards and strong advocates for cybersecurity in order to deliver trustworthy compute infrastructure. I read that as our customers told us security is important to them now, so now security is important to us.
I mean, VxWorks is probably the biggest, I would say one of the biggest real-time operating systems that runs on PLCs or runs in, the OT or ICS. So that doesn't surprise me. And, they've done a fairly good job. And I think they're getting a lot more limelight because there has been a lot of attacks against VxWorks and a lot of vulnerabilities released recently, even going back to 2019, some very serious ones. So I think this is them kind of catching up to what everybody's been saying, the highlights of OT and ICS being the focal point for a lot of the attacks in the news. And again, nothing new, but it sounds like
also,
that
Tyler,
bong rip
right?
is
but
happening.
Also, Tyler, I think it's also not a bad thing. And I don't want to knock Wind River. I think it took them longer than we would have liked collectively to come around to this mindset and culture, because there have been so many problems with VxWorks. But this isn't a bad thing. If recent events over the past couple of years especially have shined a light and forced someone like Wind River to go, we really need to focus on cybersecurity because our customers are demanding it, that's a good thing. Like, regardless of the reason, good for the customers for putting the pressure on Wind River to go, we need to really pay attention to security now.
It's a good thing, but this is a hard thing for them to actually accomplish.
Oh, yeah.
Because this code is legacy.
Yep.
It has a lot of technical debt probably embedded in it. And we were talking about this earlier, I think in the pre-record, with the XM mail server. The problem is, how do you go back now and retrofit software that's been around forever without any design concepts around security and now embed them all of a sudden because your customers say they need to be secure? Holy cow. This is not an easy
I think we dated
solution.
Both sudo and Exim back to the mid to late 90s.
Right.
And so and I think with Exim, you'll hear in the interview, Wheel says we couldn't go back prior to 2004 because they didn't have a source code repository versioning system.
And I mean, and I know Matt and other people here have walked into these ICS operations, and I've never been so intimidated in all my life as to walk into some of these things. And I've walked into more than a few of them and just seen I'm standing inside of a giant pinball machine feeling. And if somebody said, we need to patch something here, we don't even know the implications of this because this guy named Lou and this guy named Phil built all this stuff back in the 70s, and it was modded and modded and modded. It works, and if you touch if anything breaks, this entire facility is going to shut down with a big red blinking light, and we're going to be offline until you fix it. And you're going, I'm not touching a damn thing in this building.
You're not. And
something like
even think
VX
about the downtime too. No, so let's take this into context for a second. First, it's on VxWare to fix the security vulnerabilities and create a more secure system. It then requires these facilities to take outages to do all these upgrades and patches. And how long will that take? How long are these plants going to be down to facilitate some of these upgrades coming from the vendor themselves? To Doug's point, having worked in nuclear power 7.5 years, look, it was all about uptime for those plants. You had an outage window, and it was to change the fuel rods, and you did whatever other maintenance you could, and you got that sucker back online. How long would an upgrade of some of these systems take? How much downtime would you have in the system? This is not, this is a really difficult
from
problem
nuclear, let me tell you, we had facilities when I worked in nuclear, and they had outages planned years in advance. They had like a milestone chart, and the outage was actually on there out 5-7 years because that's when they knew the fuel rods had to be replaced.
That's when they had to replace fuel rods.
And that's when they did everything. And it's like, oh, you don't just walk in there and go, okay, guys, today we're going to take everything down and bring it back up, and hopefully it'll work because,
Nope.
then we all die.
Those plants were running, you let them run. And your maintenance schedule was 3 years out, and you built all your projects for that maintenance window, and you did as much fix as you could. You're not taking a voluntary downtime to go do some of this stuff. You're just not. It's not economical for them.
Unless you're Chernobyl. That was an involuntary
then you're down by, you don't have a choice.
Right.
Well, I had an outage window at the bank. So if I wanted to push something at the bank, we had like these inter-shift windows, but they were just so long, and after that the clock started ticking, and you were paying penalties for every minute that you went beyond that. So you want to push an update, you better make sure that update's going to push within a certain amount of time, and you better make sure it's not going to screw everything up because you had to push the big red button if it didn't come back up, and that was not something you ever wanted to do.
Ooh. That's the big thing VxWorks has to take into consideration. They can fix the vulnerability pretty easily, but the amount of unit testing and understanding their customers and what the ramifications of the configurations that are in place and the upgrade paths that these customers have to take in order to not, break additional dependencies or different PLCs or configurations, like that's astronomical in the ICS world. That's why it is such a difficult undertaking to secure ICS in a meaningful manner.
But there's another aspect too, and that is for a general cybersecurity professional that doesn't understand ICS, they have to understand the mitigations that are in place, that these aren't all sitting on the corporate background or internet accessible. Now, we've done some bridging, I know that, but there's a different level of risk because you're not talking, the idea of creating all the nodes the same except for the IP address is like old school ICS, kind of new in the IT world.
Yeah, but Lee, it's going to get better because Biden's calling for $22 billion in cybersecurity funding. So, I mean, we can just throw money at the problem, right?
Well, that'll fix like the first patch at NASA.
That's it. Yeah. The whole $22 billion.
I mean, it's like, oh, yeah, we've been wanting to upgrade those water things on the space station. So that's $20 billion. And then the other two we can use for,
it's a move in the right direction. We really do have to have congressional support that is going to fund talent. For one, like that's a big government thing that they're still trying to fix. And it is a massive issue that is, nothing short of a miracle to get done. But not only the talent, but the resourcing and just understanding of like breaking out of the government mentality to make some of this move quicker, get the initiatives, get the oversight, get facilities in place, get people and technologies in place. Those are all huge things, and those all take money, which is usually the constraint with inside a government.
Yep. Well, it's also prioritizing where to spend the money and how to optimize that spend. Because I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of waste in the federal government, as we know. $20 billion will not go very far under a federal program. It will not make a lot of impact.
Kind of like when you make a budget for me.
It. Yeah, pretty much.
Well, the other thing is that, let's say we get enough money to buy the latest control system components and stuff, and hot dang, we can move from the system that was driven by DOS up to the Windows XP version. And it's $500,000 for one component. It's got to be reality based. $22 billion doesn't seem like anywhere near enough.
It sounds like a lot to a lot of people, but then you start dealing with this kind of stuff, and you're going, this is nothing. I had line item after line item that was $5 million, $7 million, $12 million, and it's just like. It's just like all day long.
It's like our cigar budget, Doug.
It's like our cigar budget, yeah.
Think about the national grid and the size of the grid. Ooh. Think about all the oil and gas. And when I was working at RSA, we used to do a lot of work with Royal Dutch Shell. And one of the challenges we had with them was really figuring out how to get security risk on the roadmap. Because a substantial risk in oil and gas, it has to cross a threshold of $1 billion. A billion with a B, okay? And we're talking $20 billion. This is a drop in the bucket for some of these industries. Yeah. It's a drop in the bucket.
There is one silver lining, and that is a lot of the energy providers are private companies as opposed to government agencies.
True, correct.
And they can operate fairly efficiently. So the cost overhead might be lower there, but still, it's a thin hope.
Yeah, and that's true, Lee. In all those particular areas, I think where it gets tougher is when we think about state and local other critical infrastructure programs. That gets a little tougher because they're still government. Some of those are still government run versus private. And so, but again, there's $20 billion is not going to cover all the critical infrastructure needs. It's not.
It will cover the critical infrastructure needs for a couple of states.
Yeah.
You literally go out and say we're going to deal with let's just start dealing with the state of Idaho.
Rhode Island first, because
Rhode Island and Idaho and Colorado, and we'll.
That's it. The money's gone.
Sorry, Jeff.
Maybe Connecticut. I don't know, but
Adrian's here too, representing Tennessee.
Oh yeah, Adrian's here soon. So.
Hey, Adrian.
I don't know if he's.
I don't think he's on yet. So. Oh, there he is.
He looks.
There he is.
Adrian.
You can unmute it. He's not. He's allowed to talk. It's
no.
Oh okay.
No, it's not allowed to talk.
Okay.
Doug said no.
Oh, there he is.
There he is.
But I tell you what will make this all better, other than Adrian also coming on the show as well, which helps. But the establishment of a cyber safety review board. Now, they're very closely comparing this to the NTSB that regulates airline travel.
Yep.
But hacking and cybersecurity is really different from investigating an airplane crash. It's a very finite set of controls.
Is it?
Investigating an airline crash. There are a lot more variables when it comes to what they proposed of investigating and reporting on the who, what, when, where, why, how of a cybersecurity incident. I think it's apples and oranges.
Really,
still fruit. But
I actually think it's a similar problem in a way, because NTSB is investigating something that's a big unknown. You don't know what caused it. It's a part scattered across the landscape, and it's always dealing with some uncontrolled situation. And having a team that is over time. Initially, yeah, but over time, you develop skills, you develop expertise, and you get a set of response patterns. So when there's an incident, you go out and you reconstruct it, and you find out what caused it, and you try to release a report so other people can benefit from the knowledge.
I just don't want to draw on things that don't directly correlate to cybersecurity, right? I think that's some of the danger. Like, I don't want people's minds to be framed around, well, there should be an NTSB for cybersecurity. There's a huge amount of differences.
Well, yeah,
there.
It's not the same problem,
right.
but it's. The idea is similar. It's an incident response unit, just like you have incident response units for natural disasters and other things. But yeah, the procedure would be very different.
As long as they're not trying to provide attribution and like they're saying, hey, this is the root cause, this is how it happened, this is the fundamental flaws or vulnerabilities that led to this, and not try and do something like attribution. That's going to be like, hey, we shot this rocket from Russia, which triggered a RPG that bounced off a carrier pigeon and took down your plane. Like, that's essentially what they would have to be doing.
But I think, I want to go to Jeff, but also I think what would help too is having the NTSB equivalent of going to Boeing and being like, you need to fix that. Like, can we need to be able to go to someone else and be, we did an investigation, like, you need to fix that, right? Like, go to, I'm going to pick on Wind River, right? But you can pick any number of hardware and software vendors here in the U.S. that rely on contractors outside this country and point at them and be like, look, we did an investigation, and by the way, you need to fix that shit.
What's the penalty? What's the stick?
You don't get to work with the government anymore.
No more government contracts? That's a big stick for some.
Well, that was the stick in that whole report.
You need to fire all of your cybersecurity people.
Right, and with attribution, I was going the same place. You're all fired. That means you can't
every
work in
damn
the
one of
space
you
again.
out in the street. But I think it is like NTSB in that regard. I mean, the only real stick you have is that you can no longer do. I mean, that's what this executive order did. This is just for people who want to do business with the federal government.
Yeah,
so,
right.
So then those are big, huge, giant contracts. So this is the only lever you have, is that if you do not comply, just like Boeing and everybody else, it's like if you want to fly certified planes, you have to comply. And if you don't, then we're going to decertify.
And so this could potentially have positive impacts on better securing the agencies and the software used for the agencies. It doesn't do anything for the commercial space, though, which means there's still a huge amount of surface area not being covered by what this is going to do.
Sorry, Jeff, did you have comments?
Well, to what Matt just said, don't worry, PCI covers it in the private sector. I guess I would prefer, rather than an NTSB type of group which figures out what went wrong, I don't know what the equivalent is. I can't make the analogy, but certainly there's groups out there that try to determine what's wrong with things before the bad stuff happens, and I would rather see the attention be there.
I agree, Jeff.
Is there an equivalent? I don't know what it would be. I'm struggling.
No, because the FBI just
Like
goes in and
FCC
patches servers for you, so they're a response
they break
unit.
in
They're
and
not
patch
even
your
proactive.
I love that. I thought that was so cool. When I worked at Western Michigan University, if you left equipment sitting out and you didn't secure it, when they would take it, campus security would come by and would take your laptop off your desk and leave a little sticker that said, your laptop was stolen by campus security. Please come by and we'll give you a lecture on how to secure your equipment. And that's what the FBI was doing. They're like, you know what? You didn't patch this. We're just going to patch it. We're going to break in, patch it for you, and leave you a little note saying, you know what? You're an idiot. You should have patched this. So we had to do it.
But I think, Jeff, what you're hitting on is also like the UL for...
Well, yeah, that was the only thing
right?
I was coming up with is some sort of seal of approval type of thing.
That's hard when we talk about software, though.
Mm-hmm.
It is. Well, it's hard when we talk about just about anything, but especially, and it's only exacerbated these days with all the moving parts, component parts, the whole SBOM idea for software. Everything's serverless, everything's application level. There is no network anymore. So how do you do?
It's more like, but it's also, I think, in ISO standard plus UL, because like UL is for hardware, so that when you hang your TV on your wall, put it in your home, it's not going to catch fire, right? And so when we get software, the equivalent of what fire is shouldn't happen. But as we saw with SolarWinds, it's not just once they deliver the software; it's the process they use to develop and maintain that software. So the UL has to kind of also have a parallel into the ISO standards that say, hey, the way we create software, it follows a secure
Well, they were getting at that in the
process.
executive order, because they did have the stuff about you got to put this ingredient list and all this stuff for the software.
Yeah, I think the software bill of materials is potentially a starting point to get there. But you're also going to have to bring an ISO-like process around the software bill of materials to really certify not only the software bill of materials, but the process around the software bill of material and the changes. Because to your point, Paul, this stuff's going to change frequently,
please.
and so you have to.
Hold on. Sunil's here.
Sorry.
Welcome, Sunil.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yes, we've invited our guests from the next 7 because we knew we were going to go long. So,
Actually, I wanted to chime in on several of
do.
the topics you just talked about. Because I've been part of the SBOM working groups. I've also been part of the safety board review groups as well. And so I have a biased opinion on this. Well, I guess all opinions are biased, but I have a strong opinion.
We're all
on
biased. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, so let me hit the first.
Club.
The first question that you asked was around, is there a group that does this kind of review? And I had the same question. And I don't think actually NTSB is the right group for a couple of reasons. One, the word safety versus security. Now, I don't think necessarily TSA is the best group to model ourselves against either. But there is actually a group that does do this. And it's surprising because it's not what we thought. It's not what I thought would have been the right group, especially given John Lambert's quote. John Lambert mentioned many years ago, attackers think in graphs, defenders think in lists. And for as long as we think in lists, we will lose, right? Attackers win. And I think we've embraced that notion. But if you consider the airline safety, or if you consider what airlines do to ensure that basic hygiene things are done. Or if you consider what the medical industry does to ensure that basic hygiene things get done, what do they rely on? They rely on checklists.
Process. Yeah, checklist and process, right?
Yeah, and so let's take, for example, Colonial Pipeline. I'm sure none of us would be surprised if the main cause of the breach that they had was 100% due to poor hygiene. Okay? Well, then shouldn't a checklist, a simple checklist, help us address that issue? So anyway, going back to the question of who does this. So there's a guy named Daniel Borman. He works at Boeing, and it's what's called like a checklist factory. And they just spend time going through and refining checklists, trying to find ways that could be reduced, simplified, and really easily usable by practitioners, by pilots, right? And so, do we need something like that for cybersecurity?
But I also like your healthcare analogy too, because my wife works in healthcare, as does Matt's wife, right? And she will sometimes be in medical procedures, surgeries, and the like. There's a heavy amount of procedure, to your point, that has been refined, likely by the equivalent of the person for the airlines, right? It's like, how do we make it simple so that we don't have a wrong side surgery, right? It's a huge problem in the medical industry. They combat that with checklists, just as your checklist of asking the patient their date of birth, which side you're having the surgery on. That's double checked. There's a timeout process where everyone takes a timeout.
They literally take a Sharpie marker and write on your knee to make sure it's the right knee.
Multiple timeouts to go, wait, before we do this, let's just double check again. And it's a checklist process, as you described, Sunil.
But Sunil, we kind of have at least the guidance for the checklist called the CIS critical controls, right? I mean, this thing's been published forever. It is the foundation of what a cyber hygiene program looks like, but yet here we are having the same conversation of failure in cyber hygiene. So how do you take something like the CIS critical controls, turn it into some sort of mandatory checklist that gets validated against and somebody gets certified against it, right?
Kind of sounds like PCI as well, Joe.
Well, I was going to say, the answer to that's quite simple, Matt. It's regulatory compliance.
Oh, hold on. Wait, not quite yet. We'll get there eventually. But consider a patient who had a doctor operate on the wrong side. What's the first thing that's going to happen?
Lawsuit.
That's right. So insurance, I think it's going to be a huge play in this.
I've been saying that for years. But I will tell you, look how the airlines, so back to NTSB. One of the things that happens there is a sort of intangible penalty. So if your planes are crashing, like I remember one time, a long time ago, I was going to fly from Hong Kong to Denpasar, and we were looking at these different flights, and I looked up one of these airlines, and it was like, they don't have maintenance records, they've got plane crashes, and I did not buy a ticket on that plane because my daughter was with me, and I was like, I'm not taking my daughter on Lion Airlines, I'm sorry. I'll name them. I was afraid to get on the plane. And so there's some of that too, that when this sort of regulatory body starts looking at these incidents and they go, the reason this happened was because they didn't have checklists, they didn't do audits, they didn't do basic hygiene, and pretty soon people are going to start looking at those companies with a kind of like, I'm not investing there, I'm not getting involved with them, I don't use their product. And that kind of shame actually does push those airlines and push other people back into the sort of the good side of the force, I think. And I mean, and 100% on insurance. I mean, insurance, they don't want to pay, they will make you behave. Because if you don't, they won't pay, and you can't get insurance. And when you can't get underwriting, you can't do anything. Because I had a friend in high school who wrecked so many cars he couldn't get car insurance, and guess what? He couldn't drive.
It happens if you commit fraud as well. You get blacklisted.
Yep. Absolutely, and or drink too much on an airplane. Not that it ever happened to me, but. Thank you, Delta. No, I'm just kidding.
You can't get drinks on airplanes today.
You can't get on
Only
those
if you're
airplanes.
in first class.
Yes.
Or you carry a flask.
That you fill up at the bar in the...
I used to take my friend Lou, and we went in an alley in Honolulu, and he's got like a quart of gin, and he's filling up all these pocket flasks. And I was like, what the hell are you doing? He's like, I got a 11-hour flight to Dallas. It's like going to take a lot of alcohol to get there.
Sunil.
Okay, let me break back into the other topic. So
Welcome to Security Weekly.
Sorry.
All right. The other thing that I was really passionate about was the SBOM conversation, and I've been a part of the conversations around what that looks like. Because I tried to advocate for that when I was at Bank of America, specifically since I was the buyer of a lot of technologies. I asked vendors, hey, I would love to see an SBOM. Now, I think the SBOM is just the first step, right? Just getting an ingredient label. But I think the opportunity to go further now is in place. But what's the next step beyond an SBOM? And I think the medical industry, again, provides a great example here. So we have usually equated the SBOM with an ingredient label for food, right? But I would rather look at an SBOM as an ingredient label for medicine, all right? So consider a medicine bottle. You have drug facts. It tells you the composition of the medicine that you're about to take. But it also has information on usage. It also has information on contraindications. If something goes wrong, okay, then you now know, hey, maybe you ought to call a doctor or do something about that. So I think this sort of perspective of how should you use this product, and when it starts going haywire, how would you know? I think those are the kind of details that I would love to also have as well.
Well, Sunil, I agree that the SBOM is the first step, right? I think where sometimes the analogy can fall down is the ingredients in food and medicine is static, right? If whatever it is, if it's vitamin C, even if it's just vitamin C, right, it's got a bunch of ingredients. Those ingredients are validated and tested at some level. When you put that in software, you can say that I'm using this library. And today, that library is good. But tomorrow, it comes out that someone has audited every single line in all 50,000 lines of source code, and they found 21 vulnerabilities, just as an example. Now that ingredient is bad. So it can't be a static thing. It has to be a moving thing where the ingredients are audited and checked against what is being looked at. But you can't look at it until you have the list. And that's what I think by SBOM.
Just as much as we thought trans fats were good and now it's bad.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Well, and that's
really
why I thought the SBOM with an ISO-like review process that's more continuous gets us a lot closer to this point where I know the ingredients, I've tested the ingredients, and every time an ingredient changes, I revalidate that ingredient to verify that it's still good. So it's not just the SBOM. I think it's a great starting point, but I think it's an SBOM with a continuous process around it that continually validates the SBOM as it changes. And it's the combination of those two that I think gets our software in a much better place.
So then,
go ahead, Lee.
So then when you find out you got a bad ingredient, you don't do a food recall, you do a patch.
Yes.
Hopefully.
Correct. Hopefully.
It's a good point, Lee. The remediation can happen much more quickly than it can maybe with medicine that's been delivered to 100,000 people, for example.
And if the hack lasts longer than 4 hours, contact your physician.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How many vaccines had to be thrown out?
That happens too. I mean, that's happened historically over time. Yeah.
Yep.
I wanted to add, and I'm struggling with good analogies, but on the issue of implementation and how things might look good on the blackboard, whiteboard, CAD CAM device, whatever you want to call it. There's usually a world of difference once things get fielded, and I kept thinking of like I don't know if it's still on the laptops or not, but the little sticker that they would have, warranty is voided if you open up the device type of thing. If you change something from the way it's set up, is there a way to do that in a software sense?
Yeah, when I pushed out my company's SBOM, that was actually one of the first valid criticisms that came out. Like, how do I know that that's still the software that I'm consuming, right? And so there's some really great work that's being done by Dan over at Sigstore to really provide that sort of attestation that says, here's the software that you're using. It has a signature attached to it, and you can verify for yourself that these are still the components that make up the software that you're using.
Yeah.
That's important.
I think that's very important.
I did want to look at my story number 18. Why is there a lack of women in cyber?
Yep, that's one I pulled up as well.
Yeah, and I think that, when I read the headline, I'm like, oh, I really hope this person did a fair assessment of this, because I feel like there can be a lot of finger pointing and blame, which I don't think gets us there to having more diversity in our field, which is something that we absolutely need. To my delight, the author, what's her name?
Caitlin Gallo.
Caitlin did a fantastic job on this approach, and I loved the data that she was able to pull, and I was like, wow, this is like so simple. So I think that she found, for example, the media has continued this notion and supported this notion that the hacker or cybersecurity persona is that someone who is typically male, wearing a hoodie, alone, using a computer, in the dark. And she says, in general, cybersecurity in the media is typically a very masculine look. And as you can see from a Google image search, there are 9 images. They use a blue and black color scheme. It's usually a male portrayed in a hoodie. And she said, I've actually fielded questions from people like, I want to get into cybersecurity. Is that like a field where you have to talk to people, or like, do you like largely work alone? I'm like, that's a valid question. If you're from the outside looking in, you might think that, wait, I gotta be male, and I gotta be in my basement and wear a hoodie, and it's a dark room, and that's what
Paul,
I do.
Your favorite book, Nicole Perlroth's book. I had trouble just getting through the foreword.
Yes,
because I think twice, she mentioned 400-pound hackers in their mom's basement,
right?
Twice, just in the foreword, before you even get to the book proper.
Not my favorite book. That does our industry a disservice.
The stereotypes just kill me. Like, it's not necessary to tell the story.
But the stereotype goes. Speaking of books, if you read the Hacker Crackdown, Cyberpunks by Katie Hafner, right? If you pay attention to the characters they're talking about, that were people that were labeled hackers in the 80s, they were largely younger males, literally in their parents' basements with the computer, largely hacking on their own. They did, even that is kind of a misnomer. They did collaborate. They did go to conferences. They did collaborate on bulletin board systems and the like. But it was largely that curious male hacker persona that, at least in early works, and obviously it was more diversified than I think we've read about, but that was the persona back then, right? That was in the 80s. A lot of time has passed since then, and it's very different now. And I think Caitlin also did a great job to say, also a lot of these images that you see portraying cybersecurity also have that like source code backdrop to all of those images,
or matrix
and matrix backdrop that makes people think like, oh, I have to know like what code is and be a super awesome person at programming to be in cybersecurity, and that's not true. None of these things we want to be true.
Yeah, I mean, that backdrop alone just the only message there is you don't understand this.
Yes, right.
You don't have what it takes to understand this. Nobody understands this except for a select few.
But that goes deep in our culture, because that was the case
in the early days.
In the early 80s and 90s, that was the case, that there was not really a thing called the internet, depending on which part of the 80s or 90s that you're in, right? And you had to learn how to hack on your own. You had to get a computer, figure it all out on your own. I couldn't go to Google in 1989 and go, here's how I set up my computer and get my modem connected. Like, you had to read the manual and set it up. And then if you're going to hack into other systems, you had to figure that out on your own and acquire those skills. And who was anyone else to ask you, like, hey, how does all that stuff work? You had to earn the right for someone
I
to
call
teach
that
you
the priesthood conundrum, which
Absolutely.
is
Priests go back to the
which
mainframes.
Which is both good and bad. I mean, it's like a lot of professions have that, like doctors and lawyers and everybody else, and for all eternity.
But also, martial arts is where it's
martial art. I mean, there's all
martial arts. You can use it to hurt people.
Chartered accountants.
Teachers don't want to teach it to someone that's going to use it to hurt
if you
people.
can hurt them with martial arts, you really want to hurt them. You got to be an accountant.
That's true. That's true.
But I mean, all those disciplines have that kind of that mystique around them, because it does. people feel good about themselves because I'm on the inside looking out. You know, I know the secret code and the secret handshake, and so I think we kind of revel in that a little bit too. But as those professions try to reach mainstream, you have to start breaking.
We have to evolve beyond that.
And I mean, and doctors and lawyers had the same exact problem of breaking down those barriers to entry, which were like, you got to know Latin. Come on, like you don't know Latin, really? How could you possibly believe you could ever become a lawyer if you don't know some Latin? And we do the same thing. Like you don't know C, really? Assembly? Wow, how sad for you. If you don't know those things, you can't be a part of the club.
Hang on, I want to go to Jeff.
So, if I can do a shameless self-plug here briefly, because it does apply. It was just announced at the beginning of this week that I've joined the board of directors for Hack for Kids as the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this is...
Good job,
So
Jeff.
this is something that is particularly of interest to me, and I kind of believe, and I've given this a lot of thought, and I just want to touch on a couple things. You've touched on some important things. The article has touched on some important things, but it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. I think that gender roles in general and what we perceive as male versus female versus all the other categories these days, professions and occupations and so on and so forth. I mean, a lot of that, it starts with the very, very young. And, I think the article mentions high school students. I actually was just asked to join a group that's putting on a CTF for high school students with the Diana Initiative. The word's getting out. I'm into all this stuff. But that's great for high school kids, but I think it starts a lot younger.
It does.
And if you think of just any occupation in the world, if we're being inclusive and being equitable, every occupation and career choice or job in the world should reflect the demographics of the culture, roughly. If it's 40% men, 60% women, that should be in the workforce. And you start throwing in the different permutations, it should all be roughly the same. Like the first question I want to ask you is, we're talking about getting into education, but what exactly are the courses or fields of study that you think are the ones that apply to qualifying you or preparing you for fields in cybersecurity? We may not even all agree on what those are. So that's one food for thought. Another thing I wanted to share is a group of women that I work with on my day job at Online Business Systems. They put together, sometime in the last year, a presentation based on this very issue, that they all being professionals in the cybersecurity field, although more on the consulting advisory GRC side of things, none of them would ascribe or define themselves as hackers, for example. And in fact, in an early version, because I helped them put together a presentation that talks about encouraging people to either retrain or get into the cybersecurity field, and also they've been presenting to high school and colleges on why women should be attracted to this industry and so forth. In an early draft, they had one of these stereotypical images of hackers, and they're like, well, we're not that. And I'm like, maybe you want to take that out, because that would be offensive to a lot of people I know for whole different reasons than what you intend. But one of their statistics in their presentation, which I find fascinating, and I'm not going to quote it exactly, and I apologize, but some study that they found determined that when men and women are applying for jobs, and I think it's in the cybersecurity or the IT field, it might just be in general, men on average will apply for a job if they think they meet something like 60% of the qualifications, whereas women tend to only apply for positions if they think they've met 100% of the qualifications. And that alone just is mind-boggling. Like, where does that stem from?
They're much less likely to negotiate also.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that, I don't think that's cybersecurity specific. I think that's the male female gender roles that society has pushed on us for millennia, if not generations. So I think there's deeper root issues here. How do we change things? Go out and hire people that don't look like you, and talk to people that aren't like you. I will also shamelessly mention that I've got a couple women as rotating co-hosts on the Security and Compliance Weekly show. Why? Because I'm intentionally trying to involve women and people that don't look like me in doing something different that gives them a little bit of a platform and a little bit of exposure.
I think Jeff hit on something that I wanted to bring up. I think high school's too late. It's got to be earlier in the curriculum. We did an interview on PSW episode 691 with Kevin Knowlton from cyber.org, where they're actually trying to get some of this education earlier into the schools. I mean, first grade all the way through. They've built curriculum around these different age groups to get people exposed to the cybersecurity area, because she talks about it in her article around STEM. And, obviously we think of STEM, we think science, technology, engineering, math is primarily for men. But look at our wives. They're nurses. They went through a lot of science programs, right?
I always tell my wife, I'm like, what you do is not all that dissimilar to what I do. We're just in different fields.
Exactly.
But you know what?
But they've taken science, they've taken some of these things, but they took that science and went a slightly different direction. So if we can bring the education down into the curriculum, and so that these women that are these young girls that are interested in science also know that there's other avenues for that science background, and get them exposure to some of this education, I think that helps on the education front to bring more women into cyber security.
Yeah, hang on. Hold on. Lee's had his hand up for a while.
Okay, sorry.
So what I've been thinking about is that when it comes to cyber and IT, that there are some skill sets we need. Really, I mean, you have to have problem-solving skills. You have to have pretty damn good bullshit detector, and a few other things that don't require you to have an IT or cyber degree. It's really helpful to have one, and I feel like there are people, men and women alike, who could be very good in our field, but because they don't feel like they have that core curriculum under them, they won't even try it. When actually, I work with some folks that had degrees that have nothing to do with cyber or IT, and they are phenomenal.
Right. Think about a nurse for a second. My wife, she knows how to problem solve. When a patient is crashing on a bed, they know how to problem solve. Okay? They do, and they know when the bullshit sensor's up. So my wife's got that skill set. It's still not her interest, but those skill sets exist in some of these other disciplines that we don't even think about moving into this
And
industry.
You have to start early, like you say, because we've got to start convincing people they can do this.
Yes.
One of the things that really frustrates me is people come in and they say, I want to get into this, but there's no science or math involved, right? And I'm like, what? I don't understand, but
there is science. The math is
well, but I mean, I always
joke like
it's not the specifics; it's the idea that there's components of this that you can't do, and we've convinced kids from an early age that they're not capable of doing. I mean, and all sexes, all gender roles are being convinced that they cannot do this stuff because it involves science and math, and all these hard programming is another one I get asked all the time.
But Doug, it's a great point. Like sometimes even in my career and being in college, I was like, well, wait, I haven't taken classes on how to build and write up my own compiler. I'm like, can I really do computer security? And like, it turns out I don't necessarily need that skill.
You don't need to make an assembler anymore.
We're all embarrassed for you, Paul.
I am. I'm so embarrassed about that. But I was like, wait, I can program enough. And even if I didn't necessarily know how to program, it's those analytical thinking skills and the hacker mindset that we're looking for.
And that's part of this inclusiveness problem that we have, which is that we start excluding people from a very early age and saying, oh, you got to be able to do this, and you got to be able to do that, and you got to be able to do this. You can't just be like innovative or clever. You have to be able to do it. And people immediately start going, yeah, I'm going somewhere else. I'm not good enough for this.
Let me throw a thought out to you guys, because I've been thinking about this. I'm sorry, I was trying to look for something.
Yeah, your head was up a tiger's ass, I think.
I know, I'm invisible. I've been thinking about this since that interview we did with the cyber.org guy a couple weeks ago on Security Weekly, and I've had so many conversations on this recently. I forget where I said what, but I would submit to you that even referring to sort of the core skills being STEM for getting into this industry, there's gender bias wrapped into that in and of itself.
Yeah.
And what I want to say is, and I've been thinking about this a lot. Think about the best, or just think about in general the collective of people in this industry, and especially the ones that we sort of hold up as being really good hackers, really sharp technical skills. How many of them do you know? And several of them are co-hosts on this show, are pretty darn good musicians. I mean, even Bruce Schneier, who I like to bust on. He plays in a band. He's got a band, and I haven't heard him play, but I've heard he's pretty good.
How many of them are also women too? I mean, I think I went back, and again, I'm trying to get ready to launch a new series where I interview hackers, and I've done an enormous amount of research. Recently, my research led me to the Silver Bullet podcast with Gary McGraw, because he's interviewed some really interesting people, and you look at the women that he's interviewed, like Becky Bass and Dorothy Denning, shining examples.
Well, and you bring those two ladies up. I mean, the office that I was in at NSA that sort of birthed the pit was primarily a math office. Mostly mathematicians I worked with, and it was probably 2/3 women. I mean, and thinking back over my career, especially at NSA, there was a lot of women. I don't know what the exact ratio.
We need to highlight that too, I think generate motivation. Also, there's a great movie about the early NASA engineers that were black women.
Oh yeah.
What was that movie? That was I loved that movie.
Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures.
Yeah.
Great movie.
Yep. The calculators. Those people were called calculators. They were called calculators.
Human calculators.
They were called computers.
Oh,
Yes.
that's right. Computers.
Yes.
That's it. You got it. That's right.
Yeah.
It's funny. I in the neighborhood in which I grew up, one of my best friends in elementary school growing up was an African American person, black, lived a couple blocks down. And we've kept in touch, high school reunions and stuff like that over the years. And I learned relatively recently, because I went to visit him. It's been a couple of years now, but I went to visit him. His mom was still alive. His dad, I remember, you'll appreciate this, Paul. I would go over to his house to play, and his dad would be sitting in this big overstuffed leather chair smoking a cigar. And he had like a finger or two or a couple joints missing, and he said, I was in World War II. Years later, I came to, I didn't think of it as a kid that, well, that's pretty impressive that a black person was a World War II veteran. Turns out he was a Buffalo soldier.
Wow.
You don't know what that is? Google it.
Yeah.
But and I never knew this until I visited him a few years ago and was talking to his mom. His mom used to work at NSA. And I'm like, I didn't know that. And
funny
I'm like,
how she never mentioned that.
Funny how she never mentioned that. And in terms of the time frame, she was doing stuff at NSA roughly the same time frame that the women portrayed in the movie Hidden Figures were doing the stuff at NASA, which technically is only like 5 miles down the road from NSA. I mean, they're geographically very close. So at least those types of agencies early on knew to where to tap in and find the talent.
With talent is talent.
It really mattered.
Yeah.
Anyway, I will cede the floor back to whomever.
Well, and I do want to thank Caitlin for that article, because it spurred the discussion and hopefully some encouraging words for everyone, and words that all of us can take to other people as well to encourage them to be in our field. So I think that's a good closing note for this segment. We got more coming. Stay tuned. Sunil and Adrian are going to highlight and headline the next segment.